The autumn rain fell relentlessly over Dallas that Sunday evening. AT&T Stadium had erupted in celebration just 2 hours earlier when the Cowboys pulled off a dramatic 28-17 victory against the Philadelphia Eagles, their biggest divisional rivals. The city lights reflected in puddles as a black SUV parked in front of Prime Cuts, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Highland Park, an upscale area of the city. The restaurant door opened, and 5 men still wearing the blue and white uniforms of the Dallas Cowboys entered, bringing with them the electric energy of victory and a few raindrops. The contrast was immediate. The refined ambiance of the restaurant, with its dark wooden walls, contemporary art paintings, and soft amber lighting, against the grass-stained and mud-splattered uniforms that bore the marks of a fierce battle fought on the field. Marcus Johnson was the first to enter. At 29, the star wide receiver was known as much for his sure hands as for his work with youth from underprivileged communities. His face displayed a confident smile that rarely abandoned him, even in the most difficult moments. A discreet tattoo on his right wrist showed the birth date of his late mother, the woman who raised him alone on the complicated streets of South Chicago. "Man, I need a steak that's as good as that last quarter touchdown," said Marcus, running his hand over his shaved head, while small raindrops still ran down his face. Following him was Deshaun Williams, a 32-year-old linebacker and the veteran of the group. 10 seasons in the NFL had left visible and invisible scars. A wedding ring shone on his left hand, and the gold band contrasted with the game glove he still absent-mindedly held. The premature wrinkles around his eyes told stories of pain and perseverance that he rarely shared with the press. "I just want to sit down and rest these knees, man. That Eagles running back didn't make it easy today," commented Deshaun, massaging his right knee that had been operated on twice throughout his career. Jamal Richardson, the 23-year-old quarterback in his second season with the team, was the youngest of the group. A Stanford graduate with honors, he had the talent to read defenses with the same ease he devoured philosophy books. His uniform was relatively clean compared to the others, a privilege of his position and the protection offered by his offensive line. "That blitz in the third quarter almost got me," said Jamal, adjusting the prescription glasses he had put on as soon as he left the stadium. "But did you guys see how Carlos opened that hole? It was like magic, man." Carlos Mendez smiled upon hearing his name. The 27-year-old offensive tackle had hands the size of frying pans and an even bigger heart. Born in Mexico and raised in Texas, Carlos carried the pride of 2 cultures and worked tirelessly with immigrant children when he wasn't protecting his quarterback on the field. His uniform, particularly dirty on the shoulders and chest, clearly showed the physical toll of his position. "It was nothing," Carlos replied modestly. "That defensive end telegraphed his move from the line. My grandmother could block him, and she's 85 years old." Completing the quintet was Anthony Parker, a safety known for his impressive speed and devastating hits. At 25, he had transformed from a troubled kid from Detroit into one of the most disciplined players in the league. A bandage covered a cut above his right eyebrow, a reminder of a particularly violent collision in the second quarter. "I'm hungry enough to eat the entire Eagles offensive line with the quarterback for dessert," joked Anthony, his gaze already scanning the environment for an available table. The restaurant was moderately full for a Sunday night. Several families and couples occupied tables, some clearly having come from the same game, wearing Cowboys caps and t-shirts. The murmur of conversations gradually diminished as people recognized the players. Smartphones began to be discreetly raised for photos while curious gazes followed the quintet. A middle-aged maitre d' wearing an impeccable suit quickly approached, a professional smile plastered on his face. "Gentlemen, welcome to Prime Cuts. May I see if we have a table available for you?" "That would be great," replied Deshaun. "We're starving after the game." Of course. Please wait a moment." The maitre d' moved away toward the reservation counter, where he checked something on a computer screen, before conversing in a low voice with an older man wearing a waiter's uniform. The players remained in the entrance hall, talking about specific plays of the day, while some people approached timidly asking for autographs. Marcus and Carlos particularly, always the most accessible of the team, attended to fans with genuine smiles and kind words. After a few minutes, a waiter of approximately 50 years, gray hair and angular features approached the group. His name tag identified him as Frank. Unlike the maitre d', his expression was tense and his gaze cold. "I'm sorry, gentlemen," said Frank in a tone that contradicted any feeling of regret. "All our tables are reserved for tonight." The 5 players exchanged confused glances. The restaurant, although busy, clearly had several empty tables. Marcus, always the diplomat of the group, spoke first. It's no problem to wait a bit. We understand it's Sunday night and we didn't make a reservation. Frank crossed his arms over his chest. It's not a matter of waiting. All tables are reserved until closing. It was at that moment that Anthony noticed something strange happening at the back of the restaurant. A white family, also dressed in casual game clothes, had just been seated at a spacious table by the maitre d' himself. They clearly hadn't arrived before the players. Interesting, commented Anthony, tilting his head in the direction of the newly accommodated family. Looks like they just found a table for that group. The waiter cast a quick glance over his shoulder before returning his attention to the group. They had a reservation. Carlos, always observant, noticed an additional detail. I just saw the maitre d' checking the system. They arrived after us and weren't on the waiting list. Frank's face hardened. Look, let's be frank here. This is a high-standard establishment. Our customers expect a certain atmosphere. His eyes ran over the players' dirty uniforms with evident disdain. You're not adequately dressed. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Strange. That family is also wearing game clothes. It's different, insisted Frank, his voice acquiring a more defensive tone. How exactly is it different? Asked Deshawn calmly, though his eyes conveyed that he perfectly knew the answer. Frank hesitated for a moment, clearly choosing his words. They're not disturbing the atmosphere, and frankly, some of our regular customers might feel uncomfortable. The implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Marcus felt a familiar wave of disappointment followed by controlled anger, emotions he had learned to manage since childhood. Beside him, Anthony instinctively clenched his fists, and Carlos placed a hand on his shoulder. Easy, Carlos murmured to Anthony. We've been through this before. Deshawn stepped forward, his imposing presence making Frank slightly retreat. I'd like to speak with the manager, please. The manager is busy at the moment, Frank quickly replied. Then we'll wait, Deshawn responded, his voice calm but firm, because we're not going anywhere until we resolve this properly. The impasse attracted the attention of more people in the restaurant. Some customers began turning in their chairs, curious about what was happening. A man rose from his table and approached, a gentleman of approximately 60 years, white hair and military posture. Excuse me, said the man addressing the players. You're from the team, right? My grandson can't stop talking about you, especially you. He pointed to Jamal. That touchdown pass in the last quarter was incredible. Jamal smiled politely. Thank you, sir. The man then looked at Frank with an expression of confusion. What's the problem here? Can't these men dine? Frank seemed uncomfortable with the unexpected intervention. It's a matter of restaurant policy, sir. Please return to your table. Policy? The man laughed incredulously. I was in this restaurant wearing jeans and an old Cowboys t-shirt last month. Nobody said a word. The maitre d', realizing that the situation was rapidly deteriorating, approached again. Frank, is there a problem? Before Frank could answer, the restaurant door opened again, and a young sports reporter, Rebecca Chen, from the local TV station entered. She had covered the game earlier and apparently followed the players to the restaurant to try to get some post-game statements. Marcus, Jamal, she called, approaching with her smartphone already in recording mode. Can I ask a few quick questions about today's victory? Frank's eyes widened as he realized that the confrontation now had a witness with a camera. The maitre d' immediately smiled and intervened. It seems there has been a misunderstanding. Of course we have a table for you, gentlemen. Frank was just explaining that our main area is occupied, but we have an excellent table in the VIP area. Deshawn maintained his firm gaze. There was no mention of a VIP area 2 minutes ago. Rebecca, realizing she had interrupted something, lowered her phone. Is everything okay here? Marcus, always conscious of the team's public image, was about to smooth over the situation when Anthony stepped forward. Actually, it's not, said Anthony. We were just informed that we're not adequately dressed for this establishment, although other customers with similar clothes have been accommodated without problems. Rebecca's experienced eyes immediately captured the dynamics of the situation. She had covered similar cases throughout her career and recognized the signs. That's very interesting, she commented, raising her phone again. Would you mind telling me more about this? It seems like a great addition to my report on today's game. Panic crossed the maitre d's eyes, who quickly gestured inside the restaurant. Moments later, a man in a well-cut dark suit emerged from the kitchen area. About 50 years old, with meticulously combed gray hair and a golden lapel pin, he had the air of someone accustomed to solving problems before they became crises. Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Miller, owner of Prime Cuts. He introduced himself with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It seems we're having some kind of confusion here. Mr. Miller, began Deshawn, naturally assuming the role of group spokesperson, as he did in the locker room. Your employees informed us that we cannot dine here tonight due to our clothes, although Other customers with similar attire have been accommodated without problems. Miller cast a severe look at Frank before turning his attention back to the players. This certainly doesn't reflect our establishment's policy. Everyone is welcome at Prime Cuts, especially the heroes of our team. With all due respect, intervened Jamal, his tone polite but firm, the issue isn't whether we're football players. It's about being treated with the same respect as any other customer who walks through that door. Rebecca continued discreetly filming the interaction, while more customers approached the entrance, attracted by the commotion. The older man who had approached before was now standing next to his wife. "Bob," said the gentleman, addressing the owner by his first name, "how long have we known each other? 20 years? I never imagined seeing something like this in your establishment." Miller looked increasingly uncomfortable, especially with the reporter's presence. "General Thompson, I can assure you this doesn't represent our values." "No?" questioned the man, now identified as General Thompson. "Then why is your employee denying service to these men when he just seated my family dressed similarly?" The situation had reached a critical point. More people were gathering in the entrance hall, several with their phones recording. What started as a simple post-game dinner was rapidly transforming into a potential public relations nightmare. It was then that a young waitress of approximately 25 years, with hair tied in a bun, and a name tag identifying her as Sarah, approached the group. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice firm despite the evident nervousness in her eyes, "may I serve these gentlemen at table 12? I just set it up and it's one of the best tables in the house." Miller looked at the waitress with an expression that mixed surprise and relief. "Of course, Sarah. Please accommodate our distinguished guests." Frank seemed about to protest, but a severe look from Miller silenced him. Carlos exchanged glances with his teammates. "What do you guys think?" he asked in a low voice. Marcus assessed the situation. Part of him just wanted to leave, but another part knew there was something bigger at stake here. "I think we should stay," he finally replied. "Not for us, but for whoever comes after." Deshaun nodded in agreement. "It's not the first time we've gone through this, and unfortunately, it won't be the last. But each time we face it, we make a difference." Sarah waited patiently, her smile revealing a mix of admiration for the players and discomfort with the situation. "Show us the way, Sarah," said Jamal gently. As the group followed the waitress into the restaurant, Rebecca approached Miller. "Mr. Miller, would you like to make an official comment on what just happened here?" Miller forced a smile. "It was just a misunderstanding about table availability. We are honored to serve the Cowboys players tonight." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "What about the allegations of discriminatory treatment made by the players?" "There was no discrimination whatsoever," Miller stated firmly, although his gaze avoided the camera. Prime Cuts takes pride in serving a diverse clientele. Meanwhile, Sarah was leading the 5 players through the restaurant. The path to table 12 passed through the center of the main hall, making it impossible for other customers not to notice the group's presence. Murmurs of recognition and some spontaneous applause echoed through the environment. The designated table was indeed one of the best in the restaurant, a spacious booth with a view of the illuminated gardens outside, protected from the rain that continued to fall. Sarah distributed the menus with a genuine smile. "It's an honor to serve you tonight," she said sincerely. "That interception in the third quarter," she added, looking at Anthony, "was amazing." Anthony smiled, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you. Looks like we have at least one fan here." "More than one," Sarah assured. "Most of the staff watches the games in the kitchen when we can. You have many admirers here." As Sarah moved away to fetch water and bread, the 5 men exchanged meaningful glances. "This reminds me of that incident in Chicago my rookie year," commented Marcus, unfolding the linen napkin onto his lap. "Some places just don't change." Deshaun nodded thoughtfully. "My father used to tell me similar stories from the 70s. The difference is that now we have smartphones and social media. And yet," observed Jamal, "some behaviors remain the same, just more subtle." Carlos sighed deeply. "My parents crossed the border 30 years ago seeking a better life. Even after all this time, after building a business, paying taxes, raising American children, we're still seen as others. In many places." Anthony remained silent for a moment before speaking. "You know what's craziest? Tomorrow we'll be back on the training field, wearing the star, representing this city. The same people who would deny us service will cheer when we score touchdowns." Sarah returned with water and a basket of still warm artisan breads. "The breads are courtesy of the house," she explained. "The chef found out who our special guests are tonight." While Sarah took their drink orders, Marcus noticed that several customers at nearby tables were watching them, some with curiosity, others with evident admiration. A boy of approximately 10 years wearing a number 15 Jamal jersey was practically jumping in his chair, begging his parents to let him ask for an autograph. "Looks like you have a fan over there, Jamal," commented Marcus, tilting his head toward the child. Jamal smiled and waved at the boy, who responded with a radiant smile. The parents, after a moment of hesitation, allowed the boy to approach the table. "Hey, are you really Jamal Richardson?" asked the boy, his eyes wide with admiration. "That's me," Jamal replied gently. "What's your name?" "Tyler," replied the boy. "That touchdown pass today was amazing. When I grow up, I want to be a quarterback just like you." "That's an excellent goal, Tyler," said Jamal. "Do you play football at school?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I'm the quarterback of the junior team." "Well then, you're already on the right track," affirmed Jamal. "Can I give you a tip? Books are just as important as practice. My brain is my most important weapon on the field." The boy's eyes lit up. "Really? My mom always says that, and your mom is absolutely right," confirmed Jamal, picking up a napkin and a pen. "Here, let me sign this for you." As Jamal wrote a personalized message for Tyler, more people began approaching the table. What started as an unpleasant incident was transforming into an impromptu autograph session. Sarah returned with the drinks, accompanied by a man wearing a chef's uniform. He was tall, with striking features, and a well-trimmed beard. "Gentlemen, I'm David Chen, executive chef at Prime Cuts," he introduced himself. "I'd like to personally apologize for the misunderstanding at reception and offer a special selection of dishes for you tonight." Deshaun extended his hand, which the chef firmly shook. "We appreciate the consideration, Chef Chen, but we don't want special treatment, just the same respect given to any customer." Chen nodded in understanding. "That's exactly what you'll receive. But if I may make a suggestion, our prime rib is the best in town. Perfect after a victory like today's." As the players placed their orders, Frank observed from a distance, his discomfort evident. Miller had disappeared into his office, presumably to deal with the potential public relations crisis. The meal proceeded surprisingly well. The food was truly exceptional, and gradually, the atmosphere in the restaurant relaxed. Occasionally, fans approached respectfully for quick greetings or photos, and the players responded with the grace and patience they had developed over years under the spotlight. During dessert, an impressive chocolate souffle that Anthony declared was better than interceptions, Rebecca, the reporter, approached the table again. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner," she said, "but I'd like to know if any of you would be willing to comment on tonight's incident. Is this type of experience common, even being stars of the Dallas Cowboys?" The 5 men exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening between them. Finally, Deshaun, as the veteran of the group, took the floor. "Rebecca, what happened tonight unfortunately isn't an exception," he began, carefully choosing his words. "The uniform we wear on the field and the status that comes with it can open many doors, but they don't change the color of our skin or our origin." "But you're celebrities," argued Rebecca. "Idols for millions." Marcus smiled sadly. "And yet, for some people, we're just walking stereotypes. The issue isn't about us specifically. It's about a continuing pattern that affects people who look like us every day, people without cameras or million-dollar contracts to protect them." Jamal leaned forward. "What I hope people understand is that respect shouldn't be a privilege reserved for when we're scoring touchdowns or winning games. It should be the standard for how we treat each other, regardless of who we are." Carlos, usually the most reserved of the group in interviews, surprised everyone by adding, "I'm often asked what it's like to represent the Latino community in the NFL. Nights like this remind me why that representation matters, so that kids like me can see that we belong in all spaces, football fields, fine restaurants, executive boardrooms." Anthony, who had remained silent during most of the interview, finally spoke. "You know what's really ironic? On the field, we're judged exclusively by our performance, by our hard work, by our skills. Off it, sometimes we're judged just by our appearance. The contrast is educational." Rebecca seemed genuinely touched by the responses. "Do you plan to take any formal action against the restaurant?" Deshaun shook his head. "We're not here to create problems or ruin businesses. We're here to have dinner, talk, and apparently," he smiled, indicating the crowd of fans now respectfully surrounding the table, "meet some incredible supporters." At the end of the meal, when the players asked for the check, Sarah returned with an envelope instead of the traditional leather folder. "Mr. Miller insists that dinner be on the house," she explained, somewhat uncomfortable. Marcus opened the envelope and found a card with a handwritten note apologizing for the misunderstanding and offering VIP invitations for future meals. "Please tell Mr. Miller we appreciate the offer," replied Marcus, taking out his credit card, "but we prefer to pay our bill like any other customer." While Sarah processed the payment, Miller finally reappeared, clearly having monitored the situation from afar. "Gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the meal," he said with a forced smile. "I want to reiterate that the earlier incident doesn't reflect the values of our establishment." Deshaun stood up, his imposing height making him several inches taller than Miller. "Mr. Miller, the food was excellent, and Sarah's service was impeccable. As for the values of your establishment," he made a significant pause, "they are defined not just by what you say, but by what you allow to happen under your roof." Miller swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. "I will take appropriate measures, I can assure you." "I hope so," replied Deshawn, "because what happened here tonight wasn't just about us. It was about every person who looks like us and doesn't have a star on their helmet to protect them." As the 5 players prepared to leave, Anthony noticed Frank observing from a distance, still with a bitter expression. On impulse, he separated from the group and walked to the waiter. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" asked Anthony. Frank seemed surprised and slightly apprehensive but nodded stiffly. "I want you to know that I hold no grudge," said Anthony, his voice low enough to be heard only by Frank. "But I also want you to understand something. When you looked at me today, you saw only a stereotype, a black man in a dirty uniform. What you didn't see was that this same man has a degree in civil engineering and a foundation that helps children in Detroit. You didn't see the hours I spend studying plays or the injuries I overcome. You didn't see anything beyond the color of my skin." Frank kept his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to respond. "The saddest thing," continued Anthony, "is that you miss so much by seeing the world that way. I hope one day you understand that." Without waiting for a response, Anthony rejoined his teammates. As they left the restaurant, the rain had diminished to a light drizzle. Several customers discreetly applauded them, and Sarah ran to the door for a final thank you. "It was an honor to serve you tonight," she said sincerely. "And thank you for not giving up. It means a lot." Deshawn smiled gently. "That's how change happens, Sarah. One meal, one conversation, one moment at a time." As they entered the waiting SUV, Marcus looked at his teammates. "You know, I think this might have been the most important dinner of the season." The following day, the video of the incident, shared by Rebecca and several customers present, went viral on social media. What began as a simple post-game dinner transformed into a powerful statement about racism, respect, and the continuing struggle for equality, even for those who wear the colors of one of America's most famous and beloved teams. Prime Cuts would be forced to issue a formal apology, and Frank would be removed from his duties. But more important than the immediate consequences was the national conversation that the incident provoked, about privilege, perception, and the road still to be traveled in a nation that frequently celebrates Black and Latino athletes on the fields, but doesn't always welcome them with the same enthusiasm off them. For the 5 Dallas Cowboys players, that night at the restaurant became known among them as the 5th quarter, a reminder that some of the most important battles are fought away from the spotlights, cameras, and applause of the crowd. And just as on the field, victory in these battles comes not just from strength and skill, but from dignity, unity, and the persistent refusal to accept less than the full respect that every human being deserves.